Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome back to another video. So in this video, we will explore the container presentation pattern in React.js. Whether you are just starting with React or looking to improve your code architecture, this pattern is essential to create clean and efficient applications. So if this sounds interesting, then stick around. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel or press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. So let's get started. Alright guys, so before we jump directly into the implementation of this React design pattern, we first really need to understand what this container and presentational pattern is. What is a smart component and what is a dumb component? And what are the pros and cons of using this? So let's go to the next slide and let's understand this. So we have this container presentational pattern where we have a single component. Now you divide this single component into two different components. The first will be a container component, which is also known as a smart component. And the second is the presentational component, which we also called as a dumb component. And the reason behind this segregating them into two is because of the separation of concern. We need to maintain this separation of concern. Now let's see the same thing with a different example. So let's say we have a user component. Now we divide this user component into two different components, which will be a user container and there will be a user list presentation. Now basically what will happen in this user container and what will happen in this user list presentation. So we will see that in the user container we have to manage the state, the API calls and the data fetching. And in the user list presentation, we will not have any side effects and this will be a purely presentational component. So if you want to have a user component where you want to fetch the list of users and then you have to display them, and we divide them into a container and a presentation component. So now let's see what are the pros and cons of using this container presentational pattern. So if we go for the pros, the first one is the separation of concern. And in separation of concern, we actually divide them into containers and presentational component. The next one is the improved reusability. Presentational components can be easily reused in different parts of our application as they don't depend on any of the state or the logic. Third is the simplified testing. Presentation components are easier to test as they are stateless and they don't rely on any of the effects or external data fetching. And the last is the enhanced maintainability. As we are using this separation of concern, the code base becomes more modular and it is easier to maintain and understand. Now we discuss about the pros. Let's see what are the cons of using this pattern. The first one is increased boilerplate, and this pattern introduces more files and boilerplate code, which can be sometimes a downside for a smaller application or a very simple component, as you will always have a container file and a presentation file. Next one will be overhead for smaller applications. It could be that sometimes smaller applications or components with a very minimum logic, the separation might feel like an over engineering. Third will be the potential prop drilling. Now the presentation components are purely based on the props that we pass from the container components. And sometimes if we have the nested presentation components, then prop drilling can be a problem. And the last one is the learning curve. Sometimes new developers to this pattern may find it initially complex to understand and implement correctly, especially when they are dealing with the larger applications. As we have already discussed the pros, cons, and what is the container presentational component, now let's go into the code base and let's implement it. So I have already bootstrapped my application using Vite, and if you want to bootstrap your application, you can just use the npm create Vite @latest, and this is going to give you the React project. Now once I have the React project, I have made a change in the Vite config where I have added the server open as true and my port as 3001. Next, I have also made some change in my app.jsx. I have removed all the boilerplate code, and now let's try to run this application. So to run the application, I'm simply going to have this npm install, which is going to install all the dependencies for the project. I have already installed it, and then we will just do npm run, and then we will just do npm run dev, and this is going to start my application on localhost 3001. So we have this Vite plus React. Now, if we go back, the first thing what we are going to do is I'm going to change this. So I'm going to change this to h2, and I'm going to change here as users container presentation pattern. So I will just give this h2 tag where we have this one. And what basically we are going to do is we are going to have a problem statement where we have a user component, and to this user component we need to fetch the data from the API, and then we need to list all the users. And to use the API, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the request res. So I will have the request res, and this is a free API hosted. You can just use it and it will give you the fake data. So to get the list of users, I'm going to make use of this endpoint. So let's go back to our code base, and we are going to create a new folder first in my source folder. So I'm going to have a new folder as components. All right, then I'm going to create one more folder, and that folder will be containers, which is going to have all the containers. Now in the components, we create a new file, which is the user list.jsx. And in this user list of JSX, what I will do is I'm going to create this component. I will just use the RSC, which is going to give me a functional component. All right, now if I go to the containers, I'm going to go here and create a new file, which will be the user container.jsx. All right, I will use the RSC, and that is going to give me a functional component. As this is a container component, so this is a smart component. So all the states, application logic, data fetching, API calls will be managed within this container. So let's start with the states first. So what I will do is I'm going to have a constant. I will have the users set users, and this is going to equals to the use state, and I'm going to give this as an empty array. All right, next I will also need a state for a loading. So I'm going to have the is loading, and then set is loading, and this is going to manage my loading state, and I'm going to give it as a boolean, and this is going to be a false initially. I will also need a third state which will be handling my errors and display the errors. So I will have the error set error, and this is going to be equals to the use state, and I'm going to have it as false. Now if you want to learn more basics about the React, like the states and how the React application works and everything, I have a complete video on it. You can just click on the card above and jump to it directly. Now once we have all the states, what I will do is I'm going to create a function which will be a get users, and this function is going to fetch the users from the server. I'm going to use it as an async. All right, now inside this, what I will do is first let's have this set loading, and I'm going to make this as true because we are going to fetch the data from the server. Next I'm going to use a try catch block. All right, and in the catch block, if there is an error, what I will do is I'm going to set the error as true. So this will tell me that there is an error and we need to display an error message. I will also use a finally block, and in this finally block, I'm going to change this set loading, and this set loading I'm going to change it to false, as we have already true here. So we are going to change it false in the end once the API call is done. Now in this try block, what we need to do is let's have a constant response, and we are going to make use of a fetch to make an API call. So I will have the await fetch, and we need to pass the endpoint here. Since we are going to use the request reg, so let's take an endpoint. So we can take this endpoint. So what I will do is I'm going to copy this users, and let's put it here users, and we also need to give the domain, and this will be the domain. So I'm going to copy the domain and then put the domain here. So I'm going to have it here. So our endpoint will be https request.in/API/users, and this is going to give us the list of users. Now once we have the users, I'm going to change this to JSON. So I will have this response dot, let's have a JSON. All right, now what I can do is I can simply do a console.log, and I can simply log the JSON here. All right, now if we want to see what is this JSON, we have to make this API call. For that, what we have to call this get users. So what I will do is I will go here and I'm going to have a use effect, and let's make this API call using the use effect. So I'm going to have this use effect, and here I will have the get users. So this is going to make an API call for the get users, and I only want to run this once. All right, now once we have this, what I will do is we are not going to change anything here, but let's have this user list first. So for this user list, what we will do is we are simply going to have here as user list. Now I can make use of this user list and return it here. So in this JSX, what I will do is I will have the user list, and I will pass the user list here. Now we can just make use of this user container into our app.jsx, and we can run and see what data we get back from our API. So I'm going to have the user container here. All right, let's go to the browser and let's check now. So I'm going to go to my browser, and in the browser, I'm going to go to the inspect element. All right, let's go to the console and I'm going to refresh it. And we see that we have this promise and this promise is pending. So what we can do is we can go back, and in this container, we have to use the await. So I'm going to go here. Let's use the await so that we can resolve this promise. And once we have this, now we see that we get the data. So these are the users that we are getting from the API call. So I'm going to go back here. We get the JSON. So here I will do a check that if JSON.data is not available, then we have to return from here. All right. And if it's available, then we are going to do the set user, and I'm going to set the JSON.data. All right. Now we have this information. We also have the user. What we can do is we can just pass those users as a prop into our user list, which is going to display the data. So first we are going to pass the users, and this will be equals to the users. Then we are also going to pass the loading state. So I'm going to have the loading as is loading. And the third we need to pass is the error. So I'm going to pass the error. So let's have the error. All right. So now we have done with this component. I will just remove this React. We are not using it. So I will remove it. And now the next we need to do is we need to work on this user list component. So let's go to the user list component. And in this user list component, what we will do is first let's have the props here. So I'm going to destructure the props, and this is going to give me the users loading, and it's going to give me the error. Now here what I will do is we will just make a check that if this loading is true, then in that case we just need to return, and I'm going to return a div which will have ... loading. All right. Similarly, if there is an error, so the error will become true. All right. And if there is an error, then in that case I'm going to return here something went wrong. So now you will see that this component is purely displaying things based on the props it has received. And the last one will be if there are no users, then in that case we can just use return null. All right. And now we can just display our list. So for displaying our list, what I will do is we are going to have a JSX. I'm going to have a div class name. I will have a class name as a flex. So I already have some class names added in my app.css. Then we will just display the user. So I'm going to have the user.length and user.map. And on this, what we can do is if there is a user, then we can just display that user. All right, I'm going to return a JSX from here. We are going to have a div, and on this div we can have a key which will be as a user ID. And then what we can do is we can just display the image. We can have the source of that image, and that source will be user.avatar. All right, we see there is an error, so we have missed a bracket here. So let's put this brackets. All right. And once we have the avatar, what we are going to do is I'm going to use a p, then I'm going to use a strong tag to display the username. So I'm going to have the user.first_name, and this is going to give me my username. And you will see that it is not giving me the suggestions because we are not using the TypeScript. But you will also see that there are some errors here, and this is that user is missing in props validation. Now this is because I'm using this ESLint, which is by default. So either you can do go quick fix and you can disable it, or you can also use the prop type. So to fix it, what we can do is I'm going to show you both the methods. For the first method, obviously, is you go to the here, you do a quick fix and you just disable it, then it will be gone for this line. Or the next approach is let's use the prop type. So what I will do is I'm going to have the import prop types, and this will be coming from the prop-types. And we are using this because we are not using a TypeScript. So we will get this linting error that the properties are not available or we are not validating these props. All right. So what I will do is let's use this prop types. And if I go here, then we can just use this component name first, user list dot, and we can just define the prop types here. So I'm going to have the prop type, and this is going to equal to an object where we are first going to have the users. All right. And for the users, I'm going to have the prop types. So we see that we have misspelled here. So I'm going to go here and this will become prop types. So here we will have the prop types, and this prop type we are going to have this as array of. So because users is going to be an array, so let's have an array of, and here we can define all the properties. So we are going to have the ID, which will be the prop types dot number, and we want this as is required. All right. After this, we will also have the first name, and this first name will be prop types dot string, and we're going to have this as is required. Next will be the email. We are going to have the prop types dot string. So email will also be a string, and then I'm going to have it as is required. And the last one will be the avatar. I'm going to have the prop types dot string dot is required. All right. and I'm going to just change this to P. All right. So we see that we have validated all the props, and now you will see that we don't have any error on this users. Similarly, we will also do it for the loading. So let's have the loading, and here what I will do is I will have dot is required, and now we can just define it for the loading. So I'm going to have the prop types dot boolean, as loading is a boolean, so I'm going to have the boolean is required. And the last one will be the error. Error will be the prop types dot boolean dot is required. So now we have defined the prop types for this, and now we will not see any errors. The next we want to display is the user email address. So let's have the user dot email, and now you will see that we see the email here. All right, so we have defined this and we have also added it. Now let's go and let's check. So if I go and if I refresh it, we see that we have the images, we have the user list displayed here, and we also see there is a warning that it is failed prop type property users of this component user list has an invalid. We can fix this. What we can do is we can just go here and we can just create a constant user here, and this user will have the prop type dot shape. This is going to define what shape of data that the user will have. So we can just change this. I'm going to remove this, cut it and put it here. All right, and here I'm going to have it as is required, and we can just simply use the users here. So I'm going to have the user, and now if we go and check, so if I refresh it, so I'm going to change this to user, and now if I go and refresh it, then we don't see any errors, and we will also see that we have this prop types implemented here, and we have this our user list, and we have this user container which is managing all the state. Now basically you can also use this user list for some other purpose. You can just reuse this component, as this is a purely presentation component, and it will present the data based on the props that you're going to pass. And in the app.tsx we always refer to the user container. So this is the container presentation pattern which you can use in your large projects at your workplace, and you can also create a good impression at your workplace when you know such kind of a patterns and you implement them. So that's all I have in this video. I hope you liked the video. A thumbs up is appreciated. You can also connect with me via Facebook or Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter for latest updates, and before you go, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. Thank you. Thanks for watching.